Imagine waking up in the year 1234. You're a peasant. The thatched roof above your head leaks when it rains. The fire in the hearth barely stayed alive through the cold night. Your first task of the day. Whisper a quick prayer, not just for blessings, but to protect your soul from wandering demons that might have tried to enter through your ears while you slept. You sit up slowly. Not because you're tired, but because your village priest warned that standing too fast after waking allows evil vapors to travel up your spine. You reach for your morning meal, a chunk of stale bread and watered-down ale. No one drinks water. Water is for bathing livestock and washing sins off corpses. Drinking it would be madness. Then you sneeze. Immediately your wife gasps and crosses herself. She blurts, "God bless you." Because for her, and for the entire medieval world, that sneeze wasn't just your body reacting to dust. It was a possible sign that your soul had just escaped your body and needed divine protection to come back in safely. Welcome to a time when belief was more real than facts, when the unseen ruled the visible, and everyday life was steered by logic that to us feels completely upside down. We often think of the Middle Ages as an age of ignorance. But it wasn't that people were stupid. They were afraid of death, of hell, of disease, of the unknown. And in the absence of science, belief filled every gap. Every part of daily life, from childbirth to coughing, from farming to flirting, was infused with strange, sacred, and sometimes outright scary ideas. In this video, we'll uncover 7 of the most bizarre beliefs that people in the Middle Ages truly lived by. Beliefs that weren't just fringe ideas, but widespread assumptions that shaped laws, medicine, love, and even fashion. Some will make you laugh, some might make you shudder, but all of them will make you wonder, what strange beliefs do we still carry today, without even realizing it? Let's begin. In the medieval world, there was no concept of bacteria. No one knew about viruses, germs, or microscopic organisms. But people did notice a connection between places that smelled bad and people getting sick, rotten meat, sewers, the stench of death. These were common experiences and they terrified medieval people. And so an idea took root: smell equals sickness. This theory had a name, miasma, a Greek word meaning pollution or bad air. The belief was that invisible clouds of foul odors, miasmas, rose from decaying bodies, stagnant water, even dung heaps, and entered your body through the nose. Once inside, they disrupted your humors, poisoned your blood, and made you ill. If you walked past a plague-ridden house and caught a whiff of something rotten, you might not blame the fleas on rats. You'd believe the air itself had turned toxic. During the Black Death in the 14th century, this fear of bad air became a full-blown obsession. Cities ordered that streets be washed with vinegar. People stuffed their nostrils with sweet-smelling herbs or carried bouquets of flowers. Yes, just like in the children's rhyme, "Ring around the rosy." Perfumes, spices, and incense weren't just about vanity. They were shields, olfactory armor. Physicians wore beaked masks packed with lavender, myrrh, and camphor. The beak wasn't a costume, it was a filter. A desperate, hopeful defense against the smell of death. The longer the beak, the safer the doctor, or so they thought. People even believed that certain smells could push out bad ones. Burning sulfur was popular. It stank, but in a different way. If it made your eyes water, maybe it was purging your lungs. Homes would sometimes be smoked out like a hive. Better a choking family than a dead one. The tragedy, sometimes it seemed to work. After all, if someone lit incense and didn't get sick, it reinforced the belief. If someone walked into a foul-smelling house and died days later, that too proved the theory. In a world without microscopes or sterilization, what you smelled could decide how you lived. What's even more fascinating, this belief didn't completely die out. Even today, we say things like "something smells off" to describe situations that feel wrong. We may not believe in miasmas anymore, but our instincts still treat bad smells as warning signs. Because maybe, somewhere deep in our historical memory, we still fear the invisible poison riding on a foul breeze. In modern courtrooms, a tearful witness might gain sympathy, but in the Middle Ages, a woman's tears could be weaponized evidence. To understand why, we have to step into a time when law was fused with theology, when emotions weren't just human responses, they were moral indicators. In this worldview, tears weren't just emotional, they were seen as a divine signal, and for women, that signal was often interpreted as either guilt or spiritual manipulation. In medieval Europe, women were believed to be inherently weaker, both physically and morally. Many scholars, especially those influenced by church doctrine, saw women as more prone to deceit and sin. Think of Eve, think of Pandora. The prevailing thought was, if women cried, they might be using emotion to distort the truth, bend justice, and trick judges or husbands. That belief made its way into court systems. In some regions, tears were considered an obstruction. A woman who cried too much during interrogation might be punished or silenced, not because she was suffering, but because her sorrow was believed to be calculated. And here's where it gets even darker. Tears were sometimes used against a woman. If she cried in a situation where she was expected to show strength, such as during the death of a husband or in defense of her innocence, it could be interpreted as a sign of emotional instability or worse. Proof of guilt, see how she weeps, they might say, she must be hiding something. But the danger didn't stop at court. In everyday life, a woman's tears could change the course of events. A crying wife could be accused of bewitching her husband into submission. A grieving mother could be labeled a cursed woman if she showed too much emotion. Even midwives were warned to avoid crying during births. It was believed that tears could pass on spiritual weakness to the baby. And if a woman's crying interrupted a public trial, some medieval laws actually allowed for her removal from the courtroom, because her presence was said to disrupt the balance of truth. This twisted belief system reveals a deeper truth about the Middle Ages. Emotion was feared, especially in women, because it was seen as chaotic, uncontrollable, and morally ambiguous. So the next time someone says, "Don't cry, it won't help," remember that in the Dark Ages, crying could do more than fail to help. It could condemn you. Yes, you read that right. In the Middle Ages, animals could and did stand trial in courtrooms, with judges, with lawyers, with witnesses, and sometimes with death sentences. To a modern mind, this sounds like something from a surreal play. But to medieval people, it made perfect sense. The line between humans and animals wasn't as clear-cut as we draw it today. If a pig killed a child, it wasn't just a tragic accident, it was a crime. And that crime demanded justice. Records from across medieval Europe show shocking detail. Pigs, cows, horses, goats, even insects were taken to court. In 1386, in the French town of Falaise, a sow was arrested for murdering an infant. The pig was dressed in human clothes and paraded through the town square. Then it was tried before a judge, sentenced to death and executed by hanging. What's more, this wasn't unusual. Entire villages would turn out to witness such trials. The point wasn't just punishment, it was symbolic restoration of order. A world where a pig could kill a child and face no consequence was a world out of balance. By putting the pig on trial, society reaffirmed its moral structure. That violence, even from an animal, could not go unchecked. Some animal trials were even defensive. In 1519, a group of rats was summoned to court in Autun, France, for destroying grain stores. They were represented by a human lawyer, Bartholomew Chassany, who argued that the rats didn't show up because they feared for their lives en route. That they had a right to safety. And you know what? The court accepted the delay. This wasn't a joke to them. It was law, it was theology, it was justice. Animals were considered part of God's creation. If they committed sin or disrupted human life, they had to be judged, just like people. This belief system was deeply tied to the medieval view of the universe as a divinely ordered hierarchy. Man at the top, then animals, then plants. But with that order came responsibility and punishment. The trials were often public spectacles, but they were also genuine expressions of belief that sin infected the world, even through animals. So next time you think your cat knocked over a glass on purpose, be thankful it's the 21st century. Because in the 13th century, someone might have put that cat on trial, and the verdict might have been fatal. In a world where science was a whisper and superstition shouted from every cathedral tower, even bread, the most sacred of daily staples, could be seen as a vessel for demonic possession. To understand this, you have to remember one central truth of medieval life. Bread wasn't just food, it was faith. Bread symbolized Christ's body in the Eucharist. It was a holy object. Consuming it wasn't just nourishment, it was communion with the divine. So when bread went bad or when strange things happened after eating it, people didn't blame bacteria, they blamed the devil. One of the most famous cases happened in 1951 in Pont-Saint-Esprit, France, but it echoed medieval beliefs that had existed for centuries. The entire village fell into chaos after consuming bread from a local bakery. People began to hallucinate, scream, jump from windows. Some believed they were animals, others claimed to see flames erupting from their skin. At the time, it was blamed on witchcraft or cursed flour, although later science pointed to ergot poisoning, a fungus that grows on rye and can cause LSD-like visions. But during the Middle Ages, they didn't have microscopes or chemical testing. If bread made you tremble, if it twisted your stomach or warped your mind, it wasn't food poisoning, it was satanic corruption. There were rituals to bless bread before baking. Monks would say prayers over wheat. Families would make the sign of the cross over loaves before slicing. And if a loaf came out of the oven looking wrong, too blackened, too heavy, with a strange shape, it might be thrown into a fire. Why? Because it could be possessed. Some believed witches could curse flour or even blow evil spirits into dough while it was rising. In certain regions of Germany and Eastern Europe, bread was never cut at night. Doing so could release spirits that had hidden inside during the dark hours. In parts of rural France, old women warned children not to leave bread face down on the table. It was an invitation to the devil. But perhaps the most terrifying belief, in rare cases, bread was said to grow eyes. Yes, eyes. Tiny holes that formed on the surface of rising loaves were seen not as natural bubbles, but as signs the bread was watching. A demon looking out from inside the crust, waiting to be eaten. And when people ate that bread and fell ill or became violent or went mad, the church had its answer. The devil had entered them, through their stomach, through something as holy as bread. This belief made food both a blessing and a danger, and it wasn't just bread, meat, milk, even cheese could be suspect. But bread, because of its sacred connection to Christ, carried the highest risk. The higher the holiness, the deeper the fall. In a world where everything sacred could also be cursed, a loaf of bread was never just a loaf. It was a test, a gamble, a bite into something that might feed you or damn you. In the Middle Ages, hair was not just about beauty or hygiene, it was a spiritual battleground. A place where sin could hide, where vanity could bloom, and where evil, yes, literal evil, could latch on and fester. To medieval minds, long hair, especially on women, was a paradox. It symbolized temptation, power, and danger. The church often cited the story of Eve as a warning. Woman's beauty was what first brought sin into the world, and her hair was her most seductive weapon. That's why women were required to cover their heads in church with veils, hoods, or wimples, exposing hair in public. That was a sign of immodesty, or worse, witchcraft, but it went even deeper than modesty. People genuinely believed that hair could trap sin, that when you committed an immoral act it could cling to your body, and your hair, with its ability to grow and store, would absorb that sin like a sponge. This was particularly dangerous for women, whose hair was seen as wild, untamed, and closer to nature, and thus to the devil. In monasteries, monks would shave their heads into a tonsure, a bald circle, to show spiritual humility and to expose the crown to heaven. But more symbolically, they believed it freed them from the weight of worldly sin. No hair, no place for temptation to root. Hair was even considered dangerous after death. In several medieval texts and legends, corpses were described as still having long, flowing hair while their bodies decayed. This was seen as unnatural, a sign the soul had not passed on peacefully. Some thought the hair had absorbed too much sin, weighing down the soul's journey to heaven. And it wasn't just women who were policed. Men with long, unkempt hair could be viewed as prideful or rebellious, refusing to submit to God's order. Knights, for example, were often expected to keep hair and beards trimmed. Anything more might be a sign of vanity, one of the 7 deadly sins. Worse still, there were stories, especially in Eastern Europe, about cursed hair. A strand cut from a sinner's head might be used in hexes or love spells. In witch trials, finding a lock of someone's hair hidden in a jar or sewn into a doll was enough evidence to condemn them. This fear of hair's spiritual power led to rituals of burning cut hair or burying it far from one's home, lest it fall into the wrong hands or summon something unholy. Hair was personal, hair was public. But above all, in the medieval imagination, hair was dangerous. So while today we grow, dye, braid, and flaunt our locks in every shape and color, for people in the Dark Ages, each strand might have been a thread tying them to hell itself. In the modern world, we gaze at the moon with wonder. We track its phases, take photos of its eclipses, and write poetry about its glow. But in the medieval world, the moon wasn't just a celestial body. It was a threat, a quiet, cold-faced menace hanging in the sky that could warp your mind and unhinge your soul. The very word lunatic comes from the Latin luna, meaning moon. And for centuries, people truly believed that prolonged exposure to moonlight could drive a person insane. This belief wasn't just idle superstition, it shaped real-life medical practices, religious teachings, and legal systems. Medieval physicians, both Islamic and Christian, wrote of the moon's influence over bodily humors, particularly the brain and nervous system. According to the humoral theory of medicine, the moon could stir up the moistures of the brain, causing seizures, hallucinations, or what they called moon madness. People who suffered from mental illness or epilepsy were often locked away during full moons, not for safety from others, but because it was believed they were more vulnerable to lunar possession. Their minds, already fragile, were like open doors, and the moon was a thief of sanity, slipping in when the sky was clear. And it wasn't just the sick. Nighttime travelers feared full moons more than wolves. A bright moon could make the shadows dance, cause illusions in the woods, or stir evil spirits said to awaken under its glow. There were even reports of animals, dogs, cows, even chickens, acting strangely during certain phases. In medieval thinking, this wasn't behavioral science. This was cosmic manipulation. Worse yet, witches. The moon was believed to be their ally. Certain phases, especially the waning crescent, were thought to grant them power. Under moonlight, it was whispered witches could brew stronger potions, cast more potent curses, and even steal a person's mind while they slept. To protect themselves, people used countercharms. They'd place silver objects believed to repel lunacy under their pillows. Windows might be covered not to block light but to shield the soul, and prayers were whispered during full moons, asking for protection from madness and dark influence. This fear bled into laws. Some medieval courts allowed leniency in crimes committed during full moons, citing lunar madness as a partial excuse. Imagine, if you murdered someone during a full moon, the court might believe it wasn't entirely your fault. In a world without electric lights or scientific certainty, the moon was an unblinking eye in the night sky, watching, waiting, whispering to the edges of your mind, and if you stared too long, they believed it might start to whisper back. Imagine walking into a courtroom, the judge in robes, the prosecutor pacing, the jury watching in silence, and at the center of it all a pig, not a metaphor, a real squealing pig, chained, standing trial for murder. As absurd as that sounds, it was a legal reality in the Middle Ages. Across Europe, especially in France, Switzerland, and parts of Italy, animals were charged with crimes, brought to trial, and punished under the full weight of the law. Why? Because medieval society didn't see animals as mindless beasts. Instead, they believed that animals, especially domesticated ones, were part of the moral order. If they broke that order, say, a pig killing a child or a rooster crowing at the wrong hour, it wasn't just tragic. It was criminal, and so animals were arrested, not figuratively, actually arrested. They were assigned defense attorneys, brought before a court, and tried just like humans. The charges ranged from theft, assault, murder, to blasphemy. Some animals even had witnesses testify against them. One of the most infamous cases, in 1386, in the French town of Falaise, a pig was put on trial for murdering a baby. The court not only found it guilty, they dressed it in human clothing, publicly mutilated it to match the baby's wounds, and then hanged it in the town square. It wasn't just pigs. Rats were summoned to court for eating grain stores. When they didn't show up because, well, they're rats, the court would reschedule or declare them in contempt. At times, the church even performed exorcisms or excommunications against swarms of locusts, beetles, or even mice, accusing them of sinning against mankind. In 1474, in Basel, Switzerland, a rooster was put on trial for allegedly laying an egg, a thing considered unnatural and potentially linked to satanic magic. The rooster was convicted of being in league with the devil and burned alive. Why did they do this? Because medieval law wasn't just about human behavior, it was about cosmic balance. When something terrible happened, it had to be explained, and if no human could be blamed, then nature itself must be held accountable. The courtroom became a theater not just for justice, but for reasserting divine order. To modern minds, it sounds absurd, cruel, even laughable, but to a medieval villager, watching a pig swing from the gallows wasn't funny, it was necessary. It proved the world still made sense, that good and evil were still being sorted, that even chaos had rules. And so in the Middle Ages, when a pig killed a child or a rat ruined a crop, they were not just animals, they were criminals, sinners,